Hello everyone, Zach Wilson, Hood County Chess Club here, continuing our series with kings and pawns. Mostly we've been looking at endgame positions, things like opposition, Trébuchet, the fox in the hen house, the square of the pawn, even learning the concept of Zugzwang. I wanted to continue with looking at the king and some of the king maneuvers that really showcase the king's mobility and attacking prowess. So we're going to look at two concepts today. One is called triangulation, and the other one's called outflanking. And this is really important, especially during king and pawn endgames, more so when there's more than just one or two pawns on the board. So we're going to start with this position here, and you can see I have a couple of arrows drawn. The white king's goal is to capture black's pawn on e4, and black's king's goal is to enter the f4 square so that he can attack white's pawns and then create a passed pawn that hopefully becomes a queen. And white's goal, of course, is trying to capture this pawn so that he can create a queen. So let's get some of that mess off the board. Okay, so in this position, it's black's turn to move. And let's take a look at what happens when black wants to move. Now, pretend you're the white player and you want to win. Well, if black moves in, we need to protect this square. So we move in, and now it's black's turn to move, and where's black going to go? King is covering, pawn is covering, pawn is covering. He's got one square, so he's forced to back out. This allows us to capture the pawn, but black's not willing to give up so easily, so he's going to go this way to try and eat white's other pawns. So we simply maneuver around, and we can check the king. And even after he takes, we can see that we have these squares covered. Black has to move. When black moves, he can no longer protect his pawn. This is a concept called Zugzwang, where your piece is in the perfect position and doesn't want to have to give ground, but it's your turn to move. These pawns can't move, they're blockaded. This pawn can't move, it's blockaded. So the only move black has is to step away from his pawn. That's the result of Zugzwang. White gets the pawn. Now, as you can see, if you watched our videos on opposition, if these pawns over here didn't exist, this would be a definite draw for black. Black makes all the right moves. And what black is hoping for here is that white will move here and it will be a draw. It would be a draw because the pawn's covering both sides. The king, if he was here, would be covering all of these. And since black's not in check and can't move, and his pawns are blockaded and can't move either, well, that would be a draw or a stalemate. And as we learned about the fox, or the fox in the chicken coop, is when you reach this position as white, or the side with the advantage, is you abandon the queening pawn, and like a fox in the chicken coop, you go over here and eat all these chickens. And then this is just an easy win from here. So we have the opposition, and one of these pawns is definitely going to queen. Easy peasy. So we can see here that when it was black's turn to move, it allowed white into the position, and black had to give ground, and white had our win. Okay. Well, what if it were white's turn to move? Well, if white made the same mistake black did and just rushed into the position, this would be a mistake, because now black can go ahead and claim the opposition here. White is forced to give ground, and we can see that black's pawn and king, they're just covering everything. And so once white has to move, black gets to the square he wants to get to, and now black is going to win this game because these pawns are dead, and that queen is that queen is coming. Okay. So let's go back to the beginning of this. It's white's turn to move. White's king can use an idea called triangulation. Triangulation, like it sounds, is you move in a triangular pattern. And so the idea being that instead of just immediately stepping forward, you could step to the side. Let's get rid of some of those lines there. You could step to the side and then come forward. Essentially, you're giving up or wasting a move so that your opponent will move, and then when you get into this position, it's your opponent's turn to have Zugzwang and be gone. As you'll remember, when it was black's turn to move and he got there too soon, white was able to push him away. And then when it was white's turn to move, if white rushed in, black could have him push away. So what white really wants to do here is move over to f2. So this is pretty great because one of two things can happen. If black enters the position now white enters just like the first example, and black's king has to go away. We capture the pawn, and you saw before how we were able to win. Another idea that black has here is to move the pawn and check the king. And here's why. What if black makes the mistake? Remember, these were the three key squares. Black's trying to get here. So think about it for a moment. If white's king takes this pawn, then black gets to move into the position, and it doesn't matter which way white goes, black takes the opposite direction. If white follows the green arrow to the right, then black comes in to the left, and vice versa. We can see that pretty simply. If I step over, you step over, and black is simply going to come and get these pawns. Okay. Well, if white tries the other direction, black's achieved his goal, and these pawns are going to fall. Let's back it up. So white does not want to grab this pawn. That would be a clear error. So what white does instead is continues with that idea of triangulation, of then moving over. So now when black comes into the position, white comes in under favorable conditions. Black can't make any progress. We saw that white's king had those squares covered. White's pawn. So unfortunately, the black king again has to step out. And now white controls the position. So that was the idea of triangulation. Can move that back just a moment, where instead of rushing forward, instead white's going to make a triangular movement, essentially taking two moves to get to a square that he could have taken one move. And wasting that move means the other side has to give ground and you gain an advantage. So hopefully that made sense. That's the idea of triangulation. And if you ever find yourself in a position with your king and you're thinking, well, if I move there immediately and then my opponent moves and I'm losing, try using triangulation where you step to the side and then move into that square. All right, let's move on to outflanking. So here's just a basic concept test. We want to see if we can get white's king into one of these three squares. And I need to be able to put a pawn on the board to move these kings because the software sees this as a stalemate. There's no point in moving. But I think we can see that if we count the number of squares here, white can move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, until finally on his 7th move, he can get into one of those squares. As where black only has to move 1, 2, 3, 4 before he enters the first of those three squares. So black has the advantage here. So white needs to use a maneuver called outflanking. Now we're going to ignore this pawn for a moment and just focus on what can the king do. Hopefully you watched our video on distant opposition, where when the kings are on the same file, that the player who claims the opposition and forces the other side to give ground has the advantage. And to do that, you need to be on the same colored square, which means white's king wants to move here to claim the opposition. That seems counterintuitive considering that that square looks a lot faster to getting over to these squares here. But claiming the opposition is the right maneuver. So we claim the opposition, and then as black moves over to the side, we continue to claim the distant opposition. Notice we're on the same colored square on the same file. Claim the opposition, claim the opposition, claim the opposition. And this might seem silly because black is already over there defending. Once you get on the file that is in the middle of the three target squares in this example, now we start an outflanking maneuver. We simply put a file empty in between us. So here's the definition of outflanking. Outflanking is a maneuver where the stronger side's king moves to the side, placing a file between the kings. And we saw white move to the side, placing this file in between the kings. Sometimes they're even willing to give the opposition to the opponent because the outflanking is the stronger maneuver. This allows the outflanking king, which is our white king, to march forward towards the target. Remember, our target is trying to get into one of these squares, without allowing the enemy king to step in front and take direct opposition. Now remember, direct opposition, if we move back, was this. We're on the same colored squares, on the same file, with the opponent's turn to move. So here white is said to have the opposition because it's white's turn to move and give ground. White seizes the opposition, black has to give ground. White seizes the opposition, and it doesn't matter which side black goes to. After he moves, white begins outflanking by simply moving to the side, putting a file between them. Okay. Once black moves, we seize the opposition. Notice we're on the same colored squares on the same file. That is distant opposition. Black moves to the side. Can you see what we need to do to outflank here? Now, some of you might say, well, can't I seize the distant opposition? And yes, we could. And we would if we were trying to prevent black from moving down the board. But we're not trying to prevent black. We're trying to gain ground and get progress up the board. There is our outflanking square. So we outflank. And once he moves, we seize the opposition. Okay. No matter which side he goes to, we can now outflank and we are gaining ground. He tries to stop us, we seize the opposition. He has to move, we outflank. We seize the opposition, we outflank, and we have entered the 3 target squares. So hopefully that shows you the idea of outflanking. Now, if we go back to the beginning here, there are several mistakes that can be made. The first one was we needed to seize the opposition here. What if we made a clear error and just ran on what looked like the natural idea of just diagonally running towards our goal? The problem is now black can seize the opposition. Notice we're on the same colored squares, on the same file for distant opposition, but now black holds the opposition while white is forced to give ground. And when white moves, can you see where black needs to move to seize the distant opposition? I hope you said here, same colored squares. Black or white moves, and where's black going to go to seize the opposition? There it is. And notice white cannot enter any of these squares. It's kind of like an invisible barrier between the kings. So white moves, opposition. White moves, opposition. Opposition. No matter where white moves, black can stop him like a goalie. He's never going to get past him. So it was really, really important that we immediately seize the opposition. And then we can maintain that distant opposition. And here, again, it didn't matter. If king went to f8, can you see the outflanking maneuver? Remember, you want to gain progress, so it's a forward diagonal move. And we want to put an empty file between us. Hopefully that helped you see h3. Seize the opposition. Where's the outflanking maneuver? h4. Opposition. Outflanking to h5. Opposition. Outflanking f6. Opposition. And again, we've entered the 3 target squares. Well, thanks again for watching. Please subscribe to our channel. Visit us on Facebook at Hood County Chess Club. Press the like button to keep up with current events, and we'll see you next time.